Welcome to Expedition Self on OMTimes Radio with lifelong learner, entrepreneur, and creator of the worlds of Expedition Self, Sam Parado. Sam shares 4 decades of studying, guiding, and teaching how to go inside so we can build an incredibly powerful, dynamic, and validating relationship with the self. Expedition Self is laced with stellar, unexpected insights about what it means to be human. Listen now and ignite your self-development process with Sam Parado.
Well, hello. Welcome to Expedition Self. I am Sam Parado, and I'm going to be your host and guide for today, and actually for all of these weeks. So today we're going to be talking about, okay, here it is, being in the belly with grit and courage. And I want to apologize before I actually get into the show, because when I wrote the summary for today, which had a little bit to do about this idea that everybody's always watching us and then it interferes with our growth process, because now all of a sudden we're thinking about what other people are thinking about or knowing that we're watched. I was really wound up about that, because every time I would talk to someone for a couple of days, it seemed like their natural experimentation or their natural desire to try things in their own lives was met with, yeah, but so-and-so will see this, or what will people think, or but then this might happen. But when I got ready to really put the notes down for today, I ended up not spending as much time in the being observed kind of state. And so I ended up focusing more on what is grit and more about even some procrastination pieces, which I'll share with you. So anyway, that's just a heads up. It's not going to follow exactly what the write-up was. And also, before we dive into this subject, I want to take a moment to invite you to follow my radio show at samparado.com. You know, we'll send you weekly reminders of the show, and we post poems and other show-related information there. Also, you can write me at hello@expeditionself.com and send thoughts or questions to the show if you're not able to listen live. So for those of you who are listening live, my number is 202-570-7057. And I've had some people in my life say, oh, it seems like I feel sad when people don't call in, and I appreciate your empathy and compassion, because I would love it if people would call in, but I'm not sure that it always fits in everyone's schedule or that it's even comfortable, right? So I like to talk a bit about what's on my mind before we explore the topic each week, and this is a bit more in depth, what I'd like to share with you than I usually do, but I'm right in the middle of it, like deep in the middle of it. And it does have everything to do with what this show is about, which is how to go inside. So I'm going to take this first section of the show and talk more about where I'm at in my process before I talk about the belly and the grit, even though I think they're all kind of combined together. So right now in my life, I'm doing a very deep dive into clearing out the too much stuff. I'm feeling very disorganized. I've been carrying things around with me for 35 years. and it's time, because I need to lighten my load. I want some freedom. And each time I go to find some quote that I remember or a drawing I did 10 years ago, I don't know where it is. And if I'm going to find it, it takes me time to go hunt it up. So it interrupts my creative output. It makes it very laborious instead of easy. So as I come upon my 60th birthday in September, I really want to feel like I am ready and freed up to pursue the things that I'm about right now, things that are mattering to me. So I started working on these things, this idea of how do I really clean out my world? Because if it wasn't cleaned out before now, there must be something going on. So I decided that I procrastinate, that I put things off, that I don't complete. what I start, that I'm not thorough enough, and that I don't, like clean up my mess after I make it, that kind of thing. And so this is where my head has been for the last couple of years, but in the last 2 or 3 months, it's gotten a lot of airtime in my thoughts. Now, keep in mind that while I've been trying to get my arms around this, I've generated a couple hundred videos, I've written a couple 100,000 words, I've carried, more than full-time client load, and certainly had a bit of fun, with my favorite clan of women and my family and my new, well, not so new raging love affair partner. And so I share this because I think that my procrastination, it hasn't stopped me from being productive or even pushing through my fear of exposure that I've lived with my entire life. And that was my last big dive into myself that produced all that stuff. And it resulted in all of that. So it's kind of like I've got these things I'm doing, and at the same time, I have this connection to a place inside myself that it doesn't have freedom and doesn't have movement. The procrastination, or not being thorough, or putting things off that need to be taken care of to keep my life working, it's caused me to feel like drugged down. So I'd like to read you a writing by David White, actually about procrastination. Is so awesome, and it helped me to think about it differently. But before I read it, what has been showing up underneath my need to get organized as I've really started to focus on it, to throw things out and clean out my spaces, to take time to thoroughly organize something or file something, I have found myself feeling this incredible fear and panic. And it makes my heart race, and it goes on for a long time. So, to help you think about it in terms of self-development, which is what I'm all about all the time, when I really turn towards these things that weren't moving, that aren't serving me, right, supporting, right, my freedom in life, and I validated that it was there for a reason, in some way was connected to places inside myself that were unconscious or unseeable. Well, then the next thing that showed up for me was what I'm assuming has been living beneath it and helping to keep it in place. And it was fear. And this fear, it's palpable and it's visceral, and I definitely can trace it to my earlier times in my life. And of course, it's syncing up with the events of the world right now too. So I'm getting to see what lies beneath me not taking good care of myself, or not finishing what I start, not being thorough with the things that make life work. And it's this paralyzing kind of fear. So if you'd asked me 4 months ago to venture a guess about what's underneath of my, non-workables in my life, I wouldn't have been able to land in this place of visceral fear. I wouldn't have. This is what self-development is all about. It's the seeking out of experiential sensory information, right? Even though you'd say, I don't want to feel that. Well, but look it's opening up my world, right? And then I'm utilizing my mind to stay focused on putting those pieces together, and then moving towards the place where I can feel original moments from my life. Now, I haven't done that work yet. I haven't found the original moments yet around this big time fear. I mean, I have a hunch of some of them, but to really go back in them. But I will be, you can bet, I'll be journaling and dreaming and drawing and moving, all kinds of things, because I'm going to be working a very intentional activity of reorganization projects, so that I can really be present to my feelings while I'm actually cleaning up. So I share all of that because I'm doing the very process, I'm doing the very growth work, I'm looking inside of myself, I'm working to have my own shifts and breakthroughs that you are. And I feel like the more we get to hear other people's experiences, the more it helps us to think about our own process. Now, before I go on to the actual topic that was for today, I would like to read this procrastination piece from David White from his book Consolations. It'll probably take 5 minutes because I want you to hear it. So here it goes. Procrastination is not what it seems. What looks from the outside like our delay, our lack of commitment, even our laziness, may have more to do with a slow, necessary ripening through time, and the central struggle with the realities of any endeavor to which we have set our minds. To hate our procrastinating tendencies is in some way to hate our relationship with time itself, to be unequal to the phenomenology of revelation and the way it works its own way in its very own gifted time, only emerging when the very qualities it represents have a firm correspondence in our necessarily struggling heart and imagination. Procrastination, when studied closely, can be a beautiful thing, a parallel with patience, a companionable friend, a revealer of the true pattern already we are surprised to find caught within us, acknowledging, for instance, as a writer, that before a book can be written, most of the ways it cannot be written must be tried first in our minds, on the blank screen, on the empty page, or staring at the bedroom ceiling at 4 a.m, which I do. Procrastination enables us to taste the single malt essence of our own reluctance. An endeavor achieved without delay, wrong turnings, occasional blank walls, and a vein of self-doubt running through all, leading eventually to some degree of heartbreak. Heartbreak is a thing of the moment, a bagatelle, and often neither use nor ornament. It will be scanned for a moment and put aside. What is worthwhile carries the struggle of the maker written within it, but wrought into the shape of an earned understanding. Just 2 more paragraphs here. Procrastination helps us to be a student of our own reluctance, to understand the hidden, darker side of the first enthusiastic idea, to learn what we are afraid of in the endeavor itself, and to put an underbelly into the work itself so that it becomes a living, satisfying whole, not a surface trying to manipulate us in the moment. Procrastination does not stop a project from coming to fruition. What stops us is giving up on an original idea because we have not got to the heart of the reason we are delaying, nor let the true form of our reluctance instruct us in the way ahead. To procrastinate is to be involved with larger entities than our own ideas, to refuse to settle for an early, underachieving outcome and wrestle like Jacob with his angel, finding, as Rilke said, winning does not tempt that man. This is how he grows, by being defeated decisively by greater and greater beings. I normally don't read that long, but it's in some ways, as I was working on this idea of working from the belly and having grit and where courage is about, what it's about, I found myself looking at this procrastination piece and thinking about, that's right, that when things come too easy, we don't then look deeper and deeper to try to understand what's really going on, what's really under there that we have yet to discern and distinguish, and that the same is true in our own self-development and how easy it is to gloss over the tops of ourselves, right? To actually take ourselves so for granted that we just expect that each day we will get up and do and complete and execute without really wanting to understand and relate and connect and deeply and profoundly care for the whole of the self. So I normally don't dive quite in that deep at the beginning. And I would say I will keep you posted on my endeavor to get beneath to those shadowy places of what really lives underneath what I have called a procrastination. The other thing I just want to say before we go to break and we come back and talk about being in the belly is that I think procrastination has a profoundly negative feel about it. Almost like you might even be thinking, oh, I can't believe you're judging yourself as a procrastinator. But really, the idea of all words that have a negative connotation is to get up underneath them, get up and underneath them, and really instead relate to them from an open and embracing way and say, what do these things actually mean to me? So, okay, when we come back from break, we will start to talk about being in our bellies.
A conscious lifestyle for a mindful life. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM.
OMTimes magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organisation, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Connect at omtimes.com. OMTimes, creating a more conscious lifestyle.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
You came across someone struggling with hunger. How would you recognize them? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break
because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time landing a job
and getting back on his feet?
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Okay, we're back. I am Sam Parado. You're listening to Expedition Self, and we are talking about being in the belly and having grit and finding courage today. So here we are, onto this idea, courage and grit. In the belly means that we're not in the head. We're not in our minds. We're not in our intellect. We're not in our thoughts. In some ways, it's even deeper than being in the heart, too. In the belly, it means that you're able to occupy yourself at a deeper level than any one aspect of yourself, right? You're not just aligned in some corner of who you are. It's a place where you can find yourself grounded and surrounded and supported by your very sense of yourself, where you can simply move and express and allow and receive. So getting to the belly of anything is certainly a process. Yeah, and like all things human, just because you got to the belly of something at one point doesn't mean you just return there and it remains the same. That's rather unlikely, actually, because in our constant learning process, we're unthinking and rethinking and peeling away set beliefs all the time to reveal this deeper connection to your feelings. So what lives in the belly is going to go through some upheaval and twisting and turning before it settles again. Long time ago, I went to a conference, and I think the person that was speaking was Stephen Levine, who is a pioneer in the area of death and dying and wrote a number of books definitely worth reading. And I'm not actually sure it was Stephen Levine, because I certainly wasn't organized enough then to write down his name and know exactly who did this. But I'm gonna try to remember. I'm gonna trust myself that I'm remembering. Anyway, he did this meditation, and it went a little like this. I've added some of my own take on it too. So allow me to kind of create this moment. So picture your stomach. Notice its movement, the way it's working, speaking to you, inviting you to listen even now. Soft belly, soft belly. Imagine the lining of the stomach, of your stomach, to soften. Feel the thickness and the density begin to loosen and make way for the space. Soft belly, soft belly, soft belly. Simply breathe into and allow your center to just relax, to be at peace, to be quiet. Soft, soft, soft belly. Breathe into your soft belly. So I don't know whether that, I don't know what that did for you, but every time I settle into soft belly, I simply settle in. And it's allowed me over the years, it obviously had an impact if it was 20 years ago or more, it's allowed me to have that place in my body to actually connect with and be able to communicate with. If you take one thing away from today's conversation, I would like you to start thinking about your belly as a separate part of who you are. My model of parts of the self has traditionally, it has included the intellect, the emotional self, the physical self, the being self, and the spiritual self. The belly, to me, though, although it's certainly a physical part of our bodies, to me, it represents this integrated source of all these aspects in one place. It can show us and guide us to know what's what by simply opening the pathway, the awareness, the intuitive connection to it, and the visceral one. So soft belly, what it does is it actually makes it possible to open the bridge to a deeper place in ourselves, to a more holistic place, to have a way to compare what we're working with in some moment in our lives and the state of the soft belly. And this is a very important, it's super important when we're wanting to have a more clear and pure way to process what's happening. It gives us a contrast or a comparison when we're able to have this control space, not in control, but a place where we go, oh, that's what soft belly feels like. That's what it is. Now, I don't know that I've mentioned this in a while, but the reason it's so important to go inside is because it's the only way to be up and ready for all that life is serving up to us. So if we're going to claim and truly occupy ourselves during life, to have the agency and authority, right, and a capacity to receive that's everything that's offered to us, both the easy and the difficult, then we have to have ways to keep moving life through us, right? To be able to keep being in some kind of a dance with life rather than locked down, to keep that energy fully flowing and to make way for new insights and experiences. Because as a human being, with the fear that I think does run in and around everything, we're ready to lock down in a moment. We're ready to defend in a moment. Soft belly is another way to check into the self, so we can create a cleaner and less obstructed container to walk through life and to, go through every day. How many of you are feeling soft belly? So if you're not, that's what's so cool. It's like, oh, I can't, my belly doesn't want to soften here. It doesn't want to open here. It doesn't want to settle for some reason. And that's when you get to check in. You have this great litmus test, this great indicator to help you know how something's going or where something's landing for you. So we begin now. We can talk about grit and courage. What is grit? What do you think it is? Do you think you have it? Or maybe where do you think your grit has made itself known to you? So I think about grit is like having mettle or moxie. I love that word. Stamina, fortitude, gumption, substance. What is your image of grit? If we were in a workshop right now, I'd say pull out a piece of paper and draw for yourself your image of grit. Right? What form does it take? What colors does it engage your mind through? Right? What textures, what moments in life might show up? I actually visualize thousands of pebbles and rocks in a riverbed, long washed over and left behind, dry, hard on my feet, uncomfortable. Some I can walk over. Some I must climb over because they're more than pebbles. They're bigger than my 5'7" frame, right? Some are smooth, but enough are pointy that the bottoms of my feet feel the sharp sting of the edge. So I see the grit. I see grit as something that I am enduring intentionally with the desire to be able to stand on it, in it, and eventually not feel it in the same way. To experience it as handleable. It's when I stand within this gritty space that I'm picturing on these rocks and pebbles that I get to a place where I don't feel the need to run or to avoid the discomfort. And when that happens, I become the grit. The grit becomes mine. I can now embody that disassembled, disproportionate, ill-fitting, overfilled endless sea of pebbles and rocks that are all movable because they're not all attached to one another, but because each one demands that I feel it as its own distinct personality. Ultimately, right, or as I go through it, finding a place that is less painful or difficult to stand on, a place where rest is possible. Okay, I just described this idea that grit is it's an uncomfortable place to stand. It's to be in, to work with. So that having my own grit, being that grit, really has me moving myself to a place where I, at some level, am able to be the champion of that rather than being afraid of it. There's something you have to think about when pondering grit, what it is and how to have it. A lot of life gives us the means to avoid and sidestep it. Comfort for many people is something we are able to attain, whether it be through food or our protected homes, or the air conditioning that keeps us cool when it's hot outside, and even by canceling out anything that we don't like. People, other people, the ills of the world, conversations we don't want to have. We are able to literally shape much of our lives so that we don't need to make contact with our grit, or with a gritty situation, or a place where the grit is so uncomfortable that we'd rather not have to feel about it. We mostly run from pain. So that being in situations that invite us to experience our own grit is something we spend a ton of time trying to avoid. In fact, the mark of a successful life for many is having dominion over anything that requires us to feel difficulty or be challenged by pain. I mean, that's actually what we're supposedly going for. So here we are talking about having grit, and yet we're constructing lives that are trying to avoid it. Now, I have to say right here, there are so many ideas that go off in my head because it reminds me of how we're trying to raise our children these days to be resilient. In this resilience, it implies that they can handle difficulty, they can deal with what's unplanned in a way that doesn't leave them traumatized. But I see a ton of time that this idea of, well, let the kids deal with it. It doesn't translate. It doesn't actually translate into untraumatized, healthy experiences. I do have a reaction when people are like, well, let the kids deal with the difficulty. It's what I had to do. There's this big difference between going towards situations that will cause us to feel our grit. And when I say feel our grit, and then it means that we're likely experiencing discomfort, pain, or difficulty. There's a big difference between going towards grit and being thrust into situations where we perceive we were powerless to say no, had to handle them, and handle things before we were ready. And there's this huge difference between being left to fend for ourselves without having someone help us understand it, believing that this builds grit, and being overwhelmed by the experience because we don't know how to process or work through it. In these examples, while grit is built, we can't escape that. Grit is definitely built. The fallout, the collateral damage to our psyches does have an unintended consequence. And one of these, I'm suggesting, is that we become less courageous. We become less willing to take risk. So the experiences when we're young that we would all say make us stronger or helped us build our own inner grit, they also cause us, as we go through life, to become less courageous. So while you're sitting in this moment right now with me, you can take this long look over your life and return to moments that were difficult, that required you to find your grit and live through them. And then think about how interested you are in recreating them. How much do you want to go live in those again? Really give yourself permission while we're right now in this moment talking about grit. Think about moments when you were required to find your grit, to be gritty, and how much you'd want to recreate those. This is the challenge. Grit is built out of the experiencing of difficulty and pain. But if we gain this grit in a way that isn't fully worked through, then it translates instead to a fear. And this translates into an entire construct of your life framework, scaffolding that you erect to avoid the very things that will help you tap into the grit that you already have lying dormant, or a willingness to build new grit because it's what life is supposed to be. I watched this a movie over the weekend, the new Doctor Strange multiverse one, and in a number of scenes, one of the characters would ask him, "Are you really happy?" And I was struck by this because I've had kind of a love-hate relationship with this question throughout my entire life. So I really think this, if you want grit, you won't be pursuing happy. That won't be what your driver is. But if you can operate in a way that builds grit, allows the grit that you have inside of you to show itself, right, to be part of your life, then you will actually be happier. Now think about why I would say that. Because happy suggests that we're going away from difficult things. We're going away from the places where the rocks cut my feet, right? I'm looking for the places that are comfortable. So in order to really have in your belly a sense of your own grit, it means you actually have to change your definition and relationship to the idea of grit and what it took to get it, or what it would take to get it. All right, when we come back from break, we're going to go a little further with this grit idea and talk about courage.
The best of holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
If I could be you,
and you could be me,
for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
All right. We are talking about grit and courage and being in your belly. And this is Sam Parada. I almost forgot. And you're listening to Expedition Self. Okay. By combining this sense of being in the belly, being a kind of all-inclusive gathering place for you to check in with the self, and then combining the willingness to feel grit and nurture it as a central and driving force for your being, it allows you to grow. Quite simply, it allows you to grow and take on new experiences in a much more expansive way. Now, I am not saying, every minute of every day you should be feeling those stones and rocks under your feet and be so uncomfortable you can't find any balance or rest. But because we tend to be focused on avoiding things that are like that, when you take on, I want to be gritty, when you take on this idea, I want to feel it in my belly, my grit, and I want to really go back and in my lifetime look at the places where grit was there, but I gave it a bad rap, then we're really in a position to build that substance from the inside out. Now let's take a brief inventory about your gift. I know we talked about like go back in your life, but let's just go a little further. So moments when you lived inside of some difficulty that was painful or felt scary, and you could hang in there. You could handle it. You felt yourself holding ground, keeping your feet firmly under you. You know, these times, they often have a loss of some kind, or a disappointment, or a moment of failure, actually maybe more than a moment, where you risked losing some part of you, or at least you thought you would. These are the places where grit existed. Just let yourself slide your mind's eye through these times. You know, when I flunked out of college and then didn't know how I was going to live or where I was going to live and what kind of job I could get at the time. Of course, my shame and embarrassment, my sense of, failing. My grit showed up in that I continued to stay in Phoenix. I didn't move back to Parker, even though I bounced around for a while. It was super difficult emotionally. I felt so alone. I had no feel for a future of any kind. I was in the middle of that wash and had no idea what the other side looked like. Or another place in my life was when I recognized for myself that I had to work on me in my first marriage, or we were not going to figure it out, that I needed to deal with my reactions and my feelings. And I'd pack my suitcase every other night. It was so uncomfortable. I was so confused. I couldn't figure out why we couldn't work it out or get along. And so the grit in that time was I was going to figure it out before I left. I was going to get to a point where I wasn't in pain anymore before I made a choice. That word stamina comes here because I think wherever we have grit, we have staying power. It's like in that piece about procrastination that I read. It's that we have the place where we go back in and figure it out. We go back in and ask questions. We don't just give it up, right? Grit gives us the ability to stick with it. It has the quality when you stay with something, even when it's painful or challenging or unraveling. When we go through experiences in our youth that build grit, but also cost us because we're so overwhelmed by the experience and thrust into situations we don't understand or can't stay with our feelings, well, then as we grow older, we actually craft situations and moments to avoid anything that's painful, challenging, or unraveling. I kind of have been saying that, right, for the last 20 minutes or so. So this brings me to the need for courage. The first thing to notice is that going towards anything that is risky to you, that risks you having to feel something enough to engage your grit, it means that courage is present. So I don't think I'm going to be talking about what is courage, but I do want to talk about why it's so needed if you're going to build your own grittiness. And I think the reason I wanted to talk about this today is because to self-develop, to evolve yourself, you'll need to muster the courage to feel gritty, which then builds grit. And you'll need to think about and work with your unconscious drive to avoid things that make you uncomfortable. People, kinds of work, activities, circumstances, communities. I mean, really get very honest here. How many, I think we're talking dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of moments do you turn away from? At this point, they may not even be conscious avoidance. They just aren't part of your life. Courage is only employed when you decide you're actually going towards something, when you have intention to weather the trouble or the dilemma or the impediment. And it's just so easy to decide something doesn't matter, or it's just not part of your life, or you didn't want it anyway. But anytime you have an opportunity to consciously settle into your grit and learn while you're there and notice your feelings and tie these to other moments in your life, you are expanding. You are expanding. And I guess what is the unspoken thing here is that I think learning things out of books and getting good words to use and placing those words on the appropriate scenario is not the same as transformation of your whole self. You must get in the mud experientially if you're going to really take on your own development. Do you have any idea how many times I've heard people say, oh, I'm not going to be on a camera, or I don't want to get out in front of those people, or I don't want to say that thing because I'm uncomfortable. Or someone will say, I'm not going to do that job. It's too hard. I don't know how to do that job. Why would you expect me to lead that? I don't know anything about that. I don't want to even have to spend my time on it. I watch it in groups of people in meetings, spending all of their time trying to justify why the meetings aren't producing anything and why they just want to stop meeting rather than working their way through the situation. It's just so easy to render life into basically doing and thinking. Oh, and reacting and defending, right? If we're going to find ourselves unconscious in there, we're going to be doing and thinking and reacting and defending. And then we hope, right? And when we're operating in life in that way, we hope somebody penetrates the heart or the crusty shell, right? So this idea of soft belly, it's like a singular hack to go straight into your being and say, what's happening in my belly? And really, even inside of soft belly, you may find you're scared, or you may find you're unsettled. But that's when you can say, where's my grit? Where's my grit? I think there are three aspects to have courage for. Like if we're going to talk about, okay, got to have courage to make way for the grit, to make way to see it, to make way to feel it, to make way to cultivate it, right? I do love that word cultivate. I probably use it in every show. Anyway, so these three things will transform, right? But they do require a very clear desire to pull them off. So the first one is to put your courage behind seeking truth about any moment or situation, and also being courageous to never find it or to not be willing to land on the thing, right? It's the never find it that really matters, because when you're looking for truth and then looking for more truth, you set yourself up to stay with things long after others would walk away, still looking for answers, still looking for something that adds insight or wisdom to you, to your own understanding of things. So we're saying that courage has to be present, but you can have courage for specific things. And really take that on. Take the idea of, I have the courage to look for truth. And watch what comes up. Watch how hard that is. Watch how many dilemmas you find yourself in the middle of. Now, the second one of these courage required intentions is to want to feel, with no regard for whether it's a feeling you like or a feeling you don't. Now, this makes so much sense, right? It's logical. There's so much we're missing. So many past moments in our life when we missed out on the exposure to really feeling, that without being on a true mission to feel, and I mean feel it all, then you'll keep finding yourself on the receiving end of life, providing unexpected vents to help you grow. So having the courage to pay that much attention to your sensory felt experience is life altering. And the third one has to do with having the courage to not live out of the good guy, bad guy mentality. This piece of courage, when you think about it, it brings you straight to needing grit. Because the minute you don't have a good guy and a bad guy, you're thrust completely into having to noodle your way through something you can't figure out, that's not so black and white, that's not so simple, right? How it all went. And you're requiring your psyche to straddle the middle. So when we straddle the middle of something, it's darn uncomfortable, right? And our belly will be agitated. Think of it like this. You go out of your way to bring dinner to a friend when they're sick. But when you have a need of that friend to pick up your child after school one day and they don't respond in kind, you might typically decide they're the bad guy. Just a little bad guy, right? For not being considerate of your needs. So when you don't go down the path of that person being the bad guy, and then you have to think about you not being the good guy, you're going to find yourself pondering something like, if there is no good guy and no bad guy here, what then is happening between us? Inside of that, that's a gritty space. It's not clear. You have to feel it. You have to talk through it. You have to find yourself in risky moments. And I know I chose kind of a bland example, but situations like this happen all the time. And when there's no courage to remove the good guy, bad guy way of thinking, then you're not going to access your grit. It's too simple. Just like David White said, it's just too easy. It's just too easy. And a lot of times, exits and goodbyes, like me packing my suitcase, become the option that actually gets taken. So I'm trying to say that grit gives you staying power. But if you have a relationship with feeling grit that makes it an undesirable state of being, then the only way you begin to build that grit is to go towards that discomfort. And you can do that in 3 ways. By having the courage to look for the truth in things, by being willing to feel everything, and by seeking the place where there isn't a good guy and a bad guy. And that relationship to your belly, it helps you know when grit is missing, when you're feeling it, when you're needing it, when you're growing that grit within yourself, and when you're running from it. So the handling of more of everything in life generates more of everything you want. But it also allows you to handle those curveballs that life dishes out to us. All of the self-development process, no matter how we look at it, no matter what angle we take with it, it's really about setting us up to be able to fully greet and meet and invite all that life dishes out so that we can embrace all of what is human inside of us. But everything about life from the time we're born is actually about diminishing and constraining and constricting the full capacity of being human. So we're really left without all the tools that we really could have. So I hope that today you have found this conversation to be helpful. And I hope that you will spend some time in the rest of today, or after you listen to this, thinking about grit and being gritty, where that's happened in your life, where you didn't get to process the grit building moments, and how you can take on these 3 courageous thought processes, or have the courage to take these things on so that you make more way for building grit and substance in your life. Thank you so much. Have a great week.